Hey guys, welcome back, Michał again. In my previous video, a link to which you can find in the description below, I already showed you how to configure, how to set up the project server. Now in this video, I will show you how to actually use it, and I will show you what happens when multiple engineers are working on the same project. Okay, so we are now back in one of my VMs. This time it's the TI VM rather than my pristine Windows VM, which is actually running the project server itself for us. So first thing we're going to do in TI, let's create ourselves a new project. Oh, you know what? I can do one better. Remember the MQTT video where I showed you how you can use S7-1200 or S7-1500 to be an MQTT client? Let's just use this project. If this is of interest to you, if you haven't seen the video yet on MQTT, just check the links in the descriptions below. It's there. Okay, so we now loaded our project. That's all good, but it's still a normal project. How can we work in the project server mode? How can you actually connect to the project server? Well, let's go to options, to settings, and this is where we will define our connection to the project server. So there you go, project server, add server connection. As you can see, you already have a connection to a local server that is actually installed when you install TIA. So server alias, just call it whatever you'd like. I'm going to call mine automation station. If you remember correctly, I strongly suggested that you guys use HTTPS when you configure your project servers for added security, and this is exactly what I did myself. The host 192.168.0.15 is mine, but if you, for example, decided to host your project server somewhere externally, maybe on a dedicated server, maybe you got yourself a VPS, somewhere in the cloud, maybe you already also got a domain with it, so you could actually use your domain name in this place. But I'm just going to use an IP address. And port, mine is 8735, so this is the default port. If you haven't changed yours, this is what it's going to be. So we add this connection now, and now let's try to connect to the server. So project server, manage server projects, list, select automation station, and there you go, we are connected. For you guys, if you do it for the first time, it probably will pop up and ask you if you are okay with the certificate. You remember we saved the fingerprint of our certificate previously in my previous video where I showed you how to set it up. So this is when you can actually use the fingerprint, check if this certificate is what it should be, and then you can decide whether you are okay with it or not okay. For me, it didn't pop up because I already done it before, I already connected to this server in the past. So currently we have no projects on the server. So this is where you can actually decide that you want to save, you want to send your project to the server. So convert a single project that I have here to the multi-user project, to a project server project. So let's add the project to the server. We can put some initial comments. So this may be initial upload MQTT client on S7-1500. And I want to create a local session as well, because what it's going to do, it's going to send the project to the server and then create me like a local copy on which I can make the changes. So add this. It's going to close it, add it to the server, and then start pulling it. And then there's a big question. Which mode do you want to use? You can use either multi-user engineering or you can use exclusive engineering. What's the difference? Well, this came with the release of V16. Previously, we only had this multi-user engineering. Multi-user engineering is when you want to have multiple users, multiple engineers making changes to the same project at the same time, simultaneously. This is a great advantage and allows you to deploy projects very quickly, very useful. But you need a license for it, so you need a multi-user license. If you don't have a license, don't want a license for whatever reason, you can still use it in exclusive engineering mode. What it's going to do then, it's going to pull you a session from the server, but at the same time, it's going to lock the server for anyone else. So you will be the only person who can actually make changes to the server. The server will remain locked to anyone else. Yeah, that's the end of the story, really. Like, no one else will be able to make changes simultaneously when you make them. You will need to remove the local session, unlock the server for other people to be able to use it. So it's a trade-off. Either, all the engineers working, but a license, or just a single guy working on the project, no license. I guess it depends on what kind of teams you work in. If it's a team of few engineers, you will probably be much better off with the multi-user engineering. If you're just a single guy programming in TIA, you probably don't need it, and exclusive engineering mode is okay for you. So I'm going to go with multi-user engineering just to show you how you can actually work on the single project, from different stations, different engineers working on the same project. I also want to open the local session because I want to just keep working on it. And this is the path where the local session will be stored. The thing to remember is local session is something different than a normal project. It can't be just opened as a normal project is. It's a local session. But as you can see, it looks exactly like your normal TI project. What's the difference? The big difference is this thing here. So this window telling you that you can't make changes here, or if you make changes here, they will not get sent to the central project server. So I can make all the types of like software changes in my blocks, and that's good. But in general, you can't touch the hardware settings. Let's say network view, topology view. You can't change the OS. You can't use version control interface, because if you make these changes and you send your copy to the central server, these changes will not get propagated. So bear this in mind. And the important thing is you can close this window, but I would say this isn't a good thing to do, because you close this window, then you go back somewhere else, you come back here and this window isn't here, and you simply don't have it in your mind. You just simply forget that you shouldn't be making changes, any changes here. You make the changes and they just don't get sent, and you find yourself having problems. Why is this? I can't say for sure, but to me it makes some sense. You wouldn't really like multiple engineers making hardware changes at the same time. Like, what if I delete a card that my colleague thinks it's still in the project and start using it? No, you need to define your hardware things centrally. One guy does it, the rest can do the programming. So it does make some sense to me. Okay, so how would I work with this? The most important thing is, I would say, this. If it's green, it means it's good. You have a connection to the server and it's all good. If it's gray, it means you don't have a connection server, so you can't actually do anything with it. You can still work in offline mode, but you will know if anyone else is maybe making changes. You will not be able to send your changes to the server. So green is where you want to be. But sometimes you will find this icon green with like a tiny blue refresh icon. This means that someone made some changes on the project server and your version is no longer up to date, and you should pull these changes down. There's another state which is like a yellow icon, and the yellow icon means that someone locked the server. I think there is also a padlock, but I'm not sure. So the yellow icon means that someone locked the server. So they can either be maybe in the exclusive engineering mode, or they can be in the server project view. Regardless, it means that you will not be able to push any changes to the server yourself. So in terms of making changes to the program, another important thing are these flags. So next to all the objects that can actually be sent to the project server, you will find flags. And an empty flag means that this thing here is at the same state as it is on the project server. So it's all good. And as soon as I start making some modifications, maybe I modify main. So I go to my main block. Remember, this is my MQTT client. I add something here. Let's say I make a change. Just add a comment. It might be a much bigger change, but let's say it's just a simple change here in main. Immediately it's going to get a blue flag. This means it's marked for check-in. All the objects marked for check-in will be sent to the central project when you check in. So that's like a good flag. That's a normal flag. Blue flag is okay. It just means that you made some changes to this. It's no longer at the same stage as it is on the central project server. And when you do the check-in, it's gonna send them. If you don't want to send these changes to the server for whatever reason, maybe you messed up a bit with the code, you just don't want to send it, you can always take the flag down. It's also quite handy to take the flag down if you maybe made some changes to some other block, and these changes are perfectly good. They will work. So you have a flag there. But you start making changes to another block at the same time. And this will probably break everything. So maybe just leave the flag there where you feel confident and just take the flag down with the other one so that you can finish working before actually synchronizing this change to the server. But I'm going to leave the flag here. Also, as soon as I add a new block, so I add a new function, it's going to create me a block, but the block, again, will have a flag because it's different than what's on the server. And these blue flags, again, they are okay. They just mean that these things will get synchronized to the server when I want to send them. So how would I actually do it? This is what this check-in button is for. So you just click check-in, and you can put some comments. So maybe updated code in main for added diagnostics, added new block for motion control. Something that makes sense. And then you have this flag, compile. The compile flag is quite important. When you say compile, it means that when it sends the changes to the server, it's going to try to compile the project there with your changes. And if it doesn't, it's going to throw you an error and tell you to fix it on the project server itself, or just discard the changes. It's up to you. Do you want to try to fix it on the project server, make it work? Or do you say, you know what, just don't do it. Clearly I did something wrong. It doesn't compile. And it might be that it compiles on your side, but it doesn't compile on the server. This would be when you didn't have the latest version locally. Maybe your colleague made the change, let's say an hour ago. You didn't refresh your session. You didn't pull the latest version. You made changes yourself. And when it is all merged up there, it doesn't work. You can take the flag down. This won't compile. We just save the changes, send the changes to the server. But I wouldn't advise it because you can end up in a project that simply doesn't compile, and this is not a good scenario, is it? So we leave the compile flag here. We start the check-in. It's now consolidating the project, so it takes the project from the server, my project, merges them, tries to compile them. If it compiles, happy days. It's going to ask us a very important question in a second. Yeah, so do you want to keep the local session or do you want to refresh? And this comes back to the flags and maybe changing their statuses. If I know that what I send to the server is I send all my changes that are relevant to me, it all works fine, I want to grab it and be on the latest revision, I just click OK. It merged the changes, and when I click OK, it's going to actually pull down like the latest revision from the server and make sure that I'm on the latest revision. If I keep local session, it's not going to any of this. It's gonna just send data up. It won't pull anything down. So it is up to you, and it will be down to a specific scenario what you do. By default, when you click OK, it pulls down the revision from the server, as it's always like the safer option. But sometimes you might not want your things overwritten, and this is exactly when you would say keep local session. But for me, it's just okay. So as you can see, we are back in our pristine condition where we have everything gray, which means there are no changes for me to send. Nothing is different on the project server. Yeah, so happy days. But remember, I told you about this administration tool, and I showed it to you very, very briefly when we were setting up the project server. Let's go back to this tool. So it's called TI Project Server V16 Administration again. And what we can do here, we need to start by adding a server connection. This will allow us to administer the server that's running somewhere else, or it could be the local host as well. 192.168.0.15 on 8735 HTTPS. Let's add this. And this is the window that I mentioned before. The first time you connect to a project server in TIA or here, it should always ask you if you are happy with the certificate that the server presents. This is when you might decide to use the fingerprint, check if it's okay or not, and then make a decision: are you okay or do you want to cancel? I'm fine. Let's just connect. And as you can see, we didn't have this last time. We now have the project here. But let's first go through what we can actually do here. So in administration view, we can add different servers, and we can administer multiple servers that can be running in different places. And then you have your servers. First thing you have is user management. This is when you can start adding users. And you have three different types of a user. You have the manager. The manager is like full access user, your administrator. Then you have a contributor. The contributor can send things, so he can make uploads, he can make downloads, but he cannot remove things from the server. And then you have your member, and the member can just pull things down. So maybe the manager is like the administrator, the lead for automation, the control lead, let's say. The contributor could be your automation dev guy who makes all the changes to the project, and the member might be maybe let's say service engineer who can pull down the latest revision of your project, but shouldn't be allowed to make any changes centrally on the server and himself. And you can promote users, demote users, add new users, and so on, depending on your privileges, of course. When you first do this, if you are not added here as a manager, it will ask you to actually log in with some privileges, either here or in TIA. It might ask you for your for your login details. Me, I was fine because I was already added here as the semantic, so I'm using it both here and there. But for you, if it asks you for your user details, you might just want to add yourself as a user here from centrally from your project server, or remotely by first logging with whatever login details you have. So your username and password from Windows, for example. So that's the users, and there is our project. Okay, so currently we have one project. If we had more, there would be a list of projects. It gives us project name, status, and other things. The initial comment, who made it, when did they make it. Currently, we are not in multi-user commissioning mode. It's something that I won't be covering very deeply, but just to let you know, when you switch a project to multi-user commissioning mode, you will get this icon highlighted here. And what this means, whenever someone tries to download the project to a POC, first thing it's going to do is going to ask him to actually upload this version to the central server. This is to prevent discrepancies between what's actually running on the POC and what's on the server. So it's actually quite a handy thing to enable. Okay, so local sessions. Local sessions tell you who has some copies of the project, at which revision are they, and where is it stored. This might become handy if you have multiple engineers. If you have like 5 engineers, each and every one of them might have a few different local sessions for whatever reason. Let's say, I made this revision 2. I go away from the project for a month. I come back, everyone is on revision 15. Maybe, it would make sense in the meantime for someone to just delete my revision, so that when I come back, I am immediately forced to grab a new revision from the project server, rather than leaving this to my choice. The history is where you will be spending most of your time. History allows you to go through the history of your project, so you can see all the previous revisions. Remember, I told you you can define how many revisions you want to hold in the rolling buffer. So all the revisions that are actually saved on the project now have a padlock, either locked padlock or unlocked padlock, but there is a padlock here. If you go above the limit, they are then deleted from the server and have no padlock anymore. I decided that my project server is going to hold up to 25 revisions. So I'm good here, but if I have 26, the last one would no longer be saved, would be deleted from the server actually. But if I have a major revision, something that I definitely don't want edited, I can just click on it and save this revision. Put a note saying major revision, it works, or something more meaningful. And this is going to put a padlock on it, which means that the rolling buffer, when it rolls and it rolls, it will never delete this revision for me. Other things you can do, you can show details. This gives you information about the comments, the notes, but in changed objects, it also tells you what change was made in this revision. So remember, revision 1 was my initial upload, but then I made some changes to the main block, and there you go, main change in OB. And another thing, I created a function block called block1 on POC_1. So it tells me exactly where some changes were being made. It won't tell me exactly the code that it changed, but it will tell me which function block or which block was changed. Was it added? Was it deleted? Was it just changed? So it's quite good. You can also export all this information by exporting history. This will export an XML file for us, so you can keep it for your records. And last thing, if you have a major revision, you might also want to save it on some backup drive, and you can do this by exporting selected revision. When you click this, click OK, it's going to create a copy of this revision somewhere else for you. So maybe a dedicated backup hard drive. Last thing you can do is roll back to the selected revision. This is handy when you mess up and your latest revision simply doesn't work anymore. This one you might want to decide to roll back to a previous revision that simply works. So let's just try this functionality now. Let's try to roll back to our initial upload, which should simply get rid of main and changes in main and of block 1. So it creates a new revision for us, which is revision 3 with comment rollback to revision 1, and tells us what it actually did. So it again changed back the OB main, and it deleted the function that I have created. But if we go back to TIA, you now have this. You now have this green icon with refresh, and you have flags with refresh. This means that the version on the server actually got some changes, and it is now different from what you have here, and you should refresh to be on the latest revision. So let's try it. Let's refresh it. Now the thing to know is you can actually decide which things get refreshed, and if you put a flag on something, so let's say you put a flag on block 1, it's not going to refresh it. So I can just decide, okay, I'm happy with the refresh, but I will only be refreshing the main. So you see, this word when the projects are marked with conflict. It is considered to be a conflict because I decide to do to implement a new change against the server, if you will. Okay, so this now refreshed, and as you can see, it did refresh my main. Yeah, so it removed my comment, but it didn't refresh my block. And now it considers my block to be actually on a later revision. So it actually would allow me again now to check in the block, and then it would create a block on the project server. So with manipulation of the flags, you can decide which things get refreshed and which things you actually send to the server or save for yourself for later. Last thing I want to show you in the single user mode, if you will, without other people modifying this at the same time, is I want to show you the server project view. So remember I told you about this, that you can't modify some things because of this. So what can you do? Well, this is when you should switch to server project view. So you click this icon, and it's going to actually link us to the project server, open the project server for us, and allow us to make modifications directly there, directly on the project server itself. And this one you can do whatever you want. You can work just like you would with a normal project. So if you go to devices and networks, we'll no longer see this message, and we can freely just add ourselves a new drive, for example. So make a modification that's normally non-markable. This is how they're called. So non-markable objects. So if we made it in the in the local session, you would have no way of sending it up to the project server. If you make it here, it's all good. So we add our social drive, we assign the drive to our PLC. That's good. And I save these changes. I'm happy with these changes. Added, right. It would probably make sense to compile it first, but I didn't. Okay, so as you can see, we have this flag again. The server is unlocked, but it has a refresh icon, which means there is a change pending. And this is our drive. So let's actually refresh this. Oh, sorry, did I? Yeah, refresh. So when I refresh, I can also decide, do I want to keep this block, or what do I want to do with it? Because this block is in a different state of the server. If I keep the flag here, it's still gonna keep it for me. So let's just refresh it. I still don't want to push my block there. I just want to grab the changes from the server for now. So the refresh is now completed. And if I go to device networks, you can see the drive. So this is how you make hardware changes. So that's all I wanted to show you regarding a single user, let's say, working with the project server. Now what we are going to do, we're going to fire up an additional VM, and I'm going to show you how it behaves when you have multiple users working on the same project simultaneously. So we are now in our second VM. This one is called VM Unified 2, has a different username, so you can differentiate between changes being made by this user and the other user when we use the administration tool. So let's go to project. Let's go to project server, manage server projects, and add our server, because this VM doesn't know about our server. So this is a completely different machine. We add our server connection. We call it, again, automation station. We connect to 192.168.0.15 on 8735. Yeah, and then we go again, project server, manage server projects, find it from the list. This time it asks us because it's the first time I do it on this machine, so I need to confirm the certificate. Oh, and this is when I'm not added to the user list. So I can just sign in as a user that is added. I know that this guy actually has the privileges to modify and access the server, so I can use him. There you go. We now see the project is here, and we can just create ourselves a local session. This is gonna grab a copy of the session from the server and load it onto our VM. And again, I decide I want to work in multi-user engineering, and when it grabs me the copy, I want it to open it as well. Okay, so the project was now pulled. We have the connection to the project. As you know already, this is all good. If we go to the administration tool again, we should now see that there is another local session. So let's add this quickly. 192.168.0.15 HTTPS add, connect to this guy. Again, accept this. Login as another user. So I'm using privileges of another user, but if I push the changes, it's still gonna mark it against my PC username. So theoretically, you could have multiple users using same login details, but I wouldn't, of course, advise it. So now in local sessions, you can see there are two users. They're both in project revision 4. They have different computer names, but they're using same username. So we are using same username, but we have different computer names. Maybe just being here, let's go to main and let's make a change and let's see what happens. So we are now in our main block, and here we can just make any change. I like just making changes in SEO because I can add a comment. So as normally, it tells me, okay, you made some change, it's ready for check-in. What happens? How does the other user see it? The other user actually immediately sees this as a yellow flag. It's not bad, it just says, hey, watch out, someone else is making modifications to this. And it'd be exactly the same if I decided to put a flag. So just mark it. I don't actually need to make change, but if I mark the intention to maybe make some changes, then the other user will immediately see this as marked by another user. So this just tells me, hey, maybe don't touch it, someone else is making changes. What if I just ignore him? So this one I can make my own change here. And this is a very dangerous situation that you wouldn't really want to do, because I can add something. So I added myself a new boolean, and this is when it gets red. It says marked with conflict. This means, and it says the same for both users, and this means that multiple users made changes to the same block, and when it comes to checking it in, you need to be just careful, because like, okay, so I check in my changes, and then someone else checks the changes, and we will overwrite each other. So you would never really want to find yourself in a situation like this. I would say, as soon as you have a red flag, call the other guy, because you can actually see, if you right-click and you go usage info, you can see who put this flag. So you can see it's my VM as VM Unified 1, and there's the other one, the other VM Unified 2. So if you know who this is, you can call the guy and ask him, hey, why did you put the flag there? What changes are you making? This one you need to maybe resolve this this problem, because when you go to check in these changes, it's going to tell you that there are some conflicts, and I can put this as comment and start the check-in, and it will tell you there are objects with conflict. It might cause you proper problems. I'm like, yeah, okay. So I will override this, and then what is going to happen? The other VM will get an icon saying refresh, and the icon saying refresh will also be next to the conflict object. So I can keep local session, I'll say okay, will refresh it for me. So he will get this icon next to his object marked with conflict, and then he will need to make a very hard choice. So let's go back to my hard choice. Does he want to make these changes, or does he want to refresh? If he makes these changes, he will override the change that the other guy made. If he wants to refresh, okay, he will refresh, but he will lose his changes. So again, quite a hard choice. I can refresh, and I can say, you know what, it's fine, just overwrite it with me. But again, no, I will just lose all my changes. But other than this, I would say project server is really good. You just need to be careful not to start fighting with other users over control, and it will be all perfectly fine. If you have any questions regarding project server, please feel free to ask in the comments. Bye.